It was supposed to be just another family dinner, a crowded table, forced laughter, and the usual comments that always made me uncomfortable. But that night, my aunt uttered a sentence that chilled me to the core. "There are people here who shouldn't even be at the table because they don't contribute anything." Everyone laughed, but I knew it was meant for me, and no one even tried to hide it. I stood there, fork in the air, trying to figure out if that had really happened. I looked at my mother, who lowered her eyes. My father pretended not to hear, and my cousins, who had always excluded me behind closed doors, gave that cynical little smile. It was as if I'd been erased from the family, there, in the middle of everyone, like an annoying detail in the background. I got up from the table. I didn't even cry. I just left the room and went to the nearest bathroom. I looked in the mirror, and the only question that came to mind was, what am I doing here? In that reflection, there wasn't just hurt. There was exhaustion, tired of trying to be accepted, of chasing after people who made no effort to understand me. And there, alone, I made a decision. I was tired of trying to fit in. I was tired of being the family's joke. And more than that, I was tired of listening in silence. That night, I swore to myself that at the next dinner, they would see me differently. Not because of what I would say, but because of what I would take. I was going to turn the humiliation into something they would never forget. And this time, they were going to have to listen to me. But before I continue, I need to ask you something. Share this story to reach further, subscribe to the channel, share this video on WhatsApp, and leave a comment telling me where you're listening from. I'll be very happy to read each comment. The next day, I woke up with that phrase lingering in my head. You don't bring anything to the table. It wasn't just about food. It was about value, about presence, about everything I was, or what they thought I wasn't. And the worst part is, it wasn't the first time. The truth is, my entire life, my family treated me as lesser. I remember being a teenager and getting good grades. No one praised me, but when my cousin barely scraped by, he'd get a party. I remember the Christmas when everyone got expensive gifts, and mine came with the store tag still attached, hastily replaced. Small things, but together, they created a pain that only those who experience it can explain. My family has always been the type that values those who make noise, those who show off, those who brag, and I was never that person. I was always quieter, more observant, reserved. I never liked to compete, and because of that, they made me invisible. They thought I lacked ambition, that I was complacent, but no one knew the internal battles I faced every day. They never knew the times I cried alone because I didn't feel like I was enough, nor the nights I thought maybe the problem was me, until one day I realized the problem was their mirror, not my reflection. I just didn't fit the distorted image they projected, and the only way to change that was to break that mirror once and for all. That's when I started planning what I would do at the next family gathering. I didn't want to fight. I didn't want to swear. I wanted surprise. Show them what they've never seen, not with words, but with action. And this time, I wasn't going to ask permission. I was going to show who I am, for real. I began to plan everything in silence. I didn't tell anyone, not my best friend, not the few coworkers who cared about me. This time, I wanted it to be just mine. I wanted every detail to be done by hand. It wouldn't be an attack. It would be a response. The most elegant, direct, and unforgettable they'd ever received. I thought for weeks about what I could do to make them pay attention. What exactly could I bring to the table that would shatter their image of me? And then an idea came to me. A simple but powerful idea. Something no one there expected. It involved courage, creativity, and everything they always said I lacked. I made lists. I scribbled in an old notebook I'd stashed in the back of a drawer. I watched tutorials. I studied late at night. I secretly bought materials. All this while going about my life as normal. Work, traffic, and a myriad of obligations. On the outside, I was the same. But inside, something had ignited, and nothing would extinguish it. I began turning my nights into creative workshops. Never the productive one in the family. I spent hours testing ideas. I made mistakes. I started over. I got frustrated, but I kept going. Because it wasn't just a plan. It was a fresh start. A way to show first to myself that I was capable. And then, to those who always doubted me, that they were wrong all along. And the most incredible thing is that, in the midst of this whole process, I started to feel more alive. For the first time in a long time, I was doing something just for myself, not for approval, not for validation, but because I wanted to. And that, alone, was already healing me more than any self-apologizing could have done. The week of the next family dinner, my heart beat faster every day. I finished the final details of what I would bring. I carefully reviewed everything. It was like preparing a presentation for the biggest audience of your life, only this time, the audience was the people who had hurt you most, and the ones you'd wanted to impress most for years. My mom called me the night before. She said, "Don't forget dinner is at 7 p.m., and make sure you're on time, okay?" She didn't ask how I was. She didn't ask if I was bringing anything. She just told me not to be late. Typical. But this time, I replied with a simple, "I'll do it," and I hung up with a smile on my face. She had no idea what was coming. I went to the store to pick up the last missing item. It was the finishing touch, the icing on the cake, literally. When I got home, I assembled everything calmly, carefully. I reviewed every step. I double-checked everything, and I left it set aside near the door. The night was long. I couldn't sleep well. But this time it wasn't anxiety from fear. It was anxiety on purpose. In the mirror, I tried on several outfits. None of them felt right, until I found a simple dress that made me feel comfortable. Because that day, I didn't want to look like someone else. I wanted to be me, just the way I am, without having to shout for space. I wanted them to see that someone's value isn't in the volume of their voice, but in the impact of their presence. The morning of dinner, I packed everything in the car. I drove in silence, listening to the playlist I'd listened to as a teenager dreaming of a place in the world. I arrived at my aunt's house, parked, and took a deep breath. I looked in the back seat. There was everything I needed. And in that moment, I knew, either they learned to see me now, or they would never have this chance again. I got out of the car calmly. The box in my hands wasn't heavy, but the meaning it carried weighed like a lifetime. I walked to the door. The sound of voices, laughter, and silverware already echoed from inside. I took a deep breath. I rang the doorbell. When the door opened and my cousin saw me with the object in my hands, she made a confused face. She asked, "Did you bring anything?" I walked in without answering. I just smiled. I walked past everyone, one by one, with my head held high. I wasn't seeking approval, nor surprise, just the right moment. I went to the kitchen and placed my contribution in the center of the table. Silence soon followed. Everyone stared, trying to understand what it was, some with mockery. Others, out of pure curiosity. No one understood right away. My aunt, the same one who'd humiliated me at the previous dinner, came over and asked, "You did that?" I nodded. "Alone?" Again, I nodded. She gave a nervous laugh, as if trying to dismiss the effort. "Wow, who would have thought?" And she turned away. But I could tell. It had hit her. For the first time, she had to acknowledge that I existed, that I was doing something. I sat at the head of the table, alone, as always. But this time, I didn't feel invisible. On the contrary, it was as if everything revolved around what I'd brought. Little by little, one by one began to comment. "Wow, this is amazing. How did you do that? This looks professional." The voices that had previously ignored me now sought my attention, and I listened, calmly. My father came closer, curious. He picked up one of the pieces and looked at it carefully. "Did you make this yourself?" I nodded. He didn't say anything else, just stared. But I saw something in his eyes that had never been there before. Respect. A silence full of meaning. An apology he could never verbalize. But in that look, it was enough. As everyone sampled what I'd prepared, the energy in the house shifted. The usual buzz gave way to long silences, quieter comments. It was as if that simple delivery had become a giant mirror within that room. A mirror that revealed everything they'd always refused to see. That there, in the family, was someone who had always been on the margins, but never less. My aunt, the same one who said I added nothing, was the last to try. She stood there with the plate in her hand, looking at it as if still trying to find a flaw, but there wasn't one. It was impeccable. She took a bite, closed her eyes, and shook her head. When she opened it, she said, "Wow, this is better than ordering." The whole room fell silent. No one could believe what they had just heard. I just smiled. I no longer needed praise. I didn't expect recognition. In fact, I didn't even want it. What I wanted, I had already earned. My own validation. They could love it, hate it, copy it, or pretend it never happened. But in that moment, I had nailed my place at that table. And it wasn't by shouting. It was by showing it. It was by doing. My mother approached with a plate in her hands. She sat next to me, something she hadn't done in years. She looked at me sideways and said, "I knew you were special." I didn't respond, because I didn't know if she said it out of love or convenience. But it didn't matter either, because for the first time, my presence spoke for itself. I no longer had to prove anything to anyone. And it was in this strange atmosphere of silent admiration that the night unfolded. No offensive jokes, no judgmental looks. For the first time, they looked at me as an adult, as someone who exists, who is capable, who doesn't live in anyone's shadow. And inside, I just thought, it took a while, but now you know. Even with the respectful silence of that night, I couldn't forget everything that came before. The venomous phrases, the cruel comparisons, the years of indifference. Sitting there, in the same chair where I'd so often felt inferior, I understood that not every victory heals immediately. Some scars continue to hurt, even when the wound has healed. I looked around. Every single person there had hurt me in some way, with words, with omissions, with looks, and it wasn't just resentment. It was a silent mourning for what could have been, for not having had a family who saw me from the start, for not being celebrated when I needed it most. The pain was strong, even in that setting of apparent redemption. My brother, who had always been the pride of the house, came to praise me. He spoke of my work with an almost genuine tone, but it was impossible to forget how many times he laughed at my ideas, called me useless, or ignored my attempts to get closer. Now, suddenly, he saw me? Or was he just surprised that I'd managed to do something that escaped the stereotype he projected? It's strange when recognition comes too late. You accept it, but it doesn't come easily. It stays there, knocking on the door, trying to be welcomed. But my heart is still wounded. I wish I could embrace every compliment, every new look. But part of me was on high alert, waiting for the next cut, because those who hurt for so long don't become safe overnight. I finished my plate slowly. The food was good, and knowing I'd made it gave it a different flavor. But along with the pride came melancholy, because sometimes we win, but we're already too tired to celebrate. That was the feeling. I had won, but inside, I still carried the weight of years of fighting for a place that had always been rightfully mine. Late in the evening, my youngest cousin approached me, one of the few who never directly attacked me, but also never defended me. She sat next to me, a glass of juice in her hands, and said, "I always knew you were different, but I never had the courage to tell you." That took me by surprise. I stared at her silently, waiting for what would come next. She continued, "When I was a kid, I looked up to you. You were quiet, but you seemed to know things no one else did. But everyone made fun of you, and I ended up staying quiet. I regret it to this day." A sincere confession. For the first time, someone there recognized not only my worth, but the pain they were afraid to face with me. We talked for a while, and as we did, I realized it wasn't just about me. It was about generations of women who were silenced, who were treated as those who don't contribute, when in fact they carried the world on their shoulders. It was about how much families disguise exclusion with jokes and prejudice with opinion, and how much that leaves its mark. My cousin told me she also felt out of place, that she was also tired of trying to be heard, and that seeing what I did that night sparked something in her. I held her hand and said, "We still have a chance to do things differently, not just for ourselves, but for those next to us, for our own history, for the table that can one day be fair to all places." I left that conversation feeling lighter. For the first time that night, someone saw me beyond my dedication, beyond the beautiful dish. They saw me as a person, as a soul. And that, for me, was worth more than any applause. Because in the end, being recognized is good, but being understood is what truly heals. As I went to grab my bag to leave, I heard my name being called from across the room. It was my uncle, the most sarcastic of the family, the one who always had a sarcastic comment, always a ready joke at my expense. He approached slowly, with an expression I'd never seen on him before, hesitation. Maybe it was embarrassment, or something very close to it. "Hey, I just wanted to say that what you did was impressive. Seriously." I stared at him for a few seconds, waiting for the but. There always was a but this time it didn't come. He just lowered his eyes and added, "I think we've been wronging you for a long time." The sentence hit me like a punch, because part of me always thought this would never come, and maybe never will from others. I wanted to respond in kind, but I couldn't. I just said, "Thank you," and I meant it. Not because it erased the years of contempt, but because maybe it was the beginning of something. Even if timid, even if belated, it was like seeing a crack opening in a concrete wall, small, but real, and sometimes that's where rebuilding begins. As he returned to the couch, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. For the first time in years, I left a family dinner feeling like I wasn't a burden, that I wasn't invisible, that even without shouting, I'd managed to change the environment around me. That's no small feat. That's enormous. And for me, it was the victory I didn't even know I was still dreaming of. In the car, before starting the engine, I stood there staring at the steering wheel, mentally reviewing every look, every reaction, every word, and I realized that more important than what I took with me that night was what I left behind. I left behind the weight of years of trying to be loved by people who barely knew how to see me, and I took with me something far more valuable, the pride of having chosen myself. 2 days after dinner, my mother showed up at my door. She didn't say anything. She just knocked and waited. I opened the door and saw her there, holding a cake, something she never brought without a reason. She entered shyly, looked around, and said, "You live so beautifully. You never told me how you decorated all this." I took a deep breath. It was clear she wanted to talk, and this time, I let her. We sat in the kitchen, and she began to talk. She said she'd been thinking about what she'd seen that night, that she'd talked to my father, and that for the first time, they realized how much they'd left me out. She said with a choked voice, "You were always here, doing everything in your own time. We just didn't have the patience to see it." That took me by surprise. My mother, recognizing it, yes, it was real. She didn't apologize directly, but each sentence was like a brick removed from the wall between us. She told me about when I was a child, and I'd said I wanted to be an artist, but she thought it was just a phase. She said she didn't mean any harm, that it was fear that I'd get hurt trying to dream, and that's why she ended up cutting me off without realizing it. I listened to everything, not with resentment, but with an open heart, because there was a woman trying to learn how to be a mother, even after so many mistakes. And I, now an adult, was trying to embrace that attempt without drowning in memories. It was difficult, but it was necessary. Because sometimes forgiveness is the only bridge between two sides that have always been at odds. Before leaving, she hugged me. And for the first time in a long, long time, that hug felt genuine. No judgment, no pressure. Just a hug between two women who were finally recognizing each other. And as I closed the door, I realized what had started as humiliation was turning into reconnection. That same week, I received an Instagram message from a distant cousin. We barely spoke, and I hadn't even remembered she followed me. She said, "I saw the dinner pictures your mom posted. You have no idea how much you inspired me." I stared at the screen. Me? Inspiring someone in my own family? It was a reality I never imagined. She said she'd always felt out of place, too. That she'd grown up being told she was weak, too sensitive, useless. And that after seeing what I'd done, she decided to start a project she'd always been afraid to share. "If you could do it, maybe I can too," she wrote. That gave me chills, because I finally understood. My pain wasn't just mine, it was collective. And it was at that moment that I realized my action wasn't just a rant, it was a manifesto. Without realizing it, I had opened a path, for myself, for her, for so many others who had been silenced within their own families. The act of taking a stand, of showing courage without shouting, had broken something. It had created cracks where there had been only cold, old concrete. That gave me a different kind of peace, a sense of purpose. For the first time, my story made sense. Not just because of the belated applause, but because of the real transformation that was happening. I saw that sometimes, the smallest gesture, like bringing something made with soul to a table that had always ignored you, can become the fuel to change lives. And in this new silence, I stopped seeking validation. I began planning new creations, new encounters, but now with people who saw me, people who listened to me, friends, colleagues, even family who for the first time wanted to know who I really was. It was the rebirth of an identity that had been silenced for too long, and now, no one could keep quiet anymore. A few months later, another family gathering came around, and this time, I was invited differently. They asked me to bring something special, just like last time. Only this time, the tone was different. It wasn't demanding, nor ironic. It was admiration, recognition. When I read the message, I smiled, because I knew I wasn't the same person who'd been ignored back then. I arrived at the new dinner feeling more relaxed. I still brought something I'd made myself, with care and affection, but it wasn't an attempt to prove anything anymore. It was a celebration of who I am. I entered that house with a light heart. I greeted everyone with a firm look, without fear. I was whole. And even if they didn't know all that it had cost, I did. This time I sat in the center of the table, not because they demanded it, but because they invited me. And there, amidst the forks, laughter, and conversation, I felt like I belonged, without needing to shout, without begging for space. They called me by name, asked my opinion, wanted to know more about my projects. It was as if they had finally opened their eyes. And I had opened mine a long time ago. My aunt, yes, that one, came up to me during dessert. He touched my shoulder and said, "You really shut everyone up gracefully. Congratulations." I just smiled, because it wasn't about shutting anyone up. It was about showing them that what they thought was small was huge all along. They were just looking through the wrong lens, and now their vision had finally changed. As the night wore on, I looked around and felt something I never imagined I'd feel in that place. Belonging, but not the kind of belonging that comes from accepting others, the kind that comes from within. I accepted myself. I validated myself. I proved myself everything I needed to, and knowing that was everything. I returned home that night with a calm in my chest that I had never felt before. It wasn't euphoria, nor relief. It was maturity. It was the certainty that I had become what I had always wanted. A woman who doesn't bow to contempt, who no longer lives begging for space at tables that previously ignored her. It was the inner silence of someone who has finally found her own voice. I walked into my apartment, and before taking off my shoes, I looked around. The simple decor, the paintings I'd painted myself, the stacked books. Everything, there was a reflection of me. For the first time, I looked at it all with love. I'd spent so much time wanting to be noticed by others that I almost forgot to notice the beauty of what I'd already built on my own. I went to the kitchen and made some tea. I sat on the couch, the lights dimmed, and closed my eyes. I remembered myself as a child, being told I was weak. I remembered the silent teenager at parties. I remembered the adult woman trying to fit into a family that didn't know how to listen. And I thought, you've won. Not because everyone has changed, but because I've stopped asking permission to exist. I knew some wounds would still sting from time to time, that not everyone would understand me, and that was okay. Because now, the person who needed to understand me was already here. Me. I was enough, and with that, I could go anywhere, even back to that table, without losing who I was. The forgotten girl in the corner of the room now walked steadily. Now she created, led, inspired, and all of this didn't come from a miracle. It came from transformed pain, from broken silence, from courage cultivated in the dark. I didn't just bring a pretty dish to that dinner. I brought my story, and no one will ever be able to take that from me. Today, my life has changed, not because I've won awards or gained fame, but because I've understood that I can build my own tables, and at them, everyone has a place. Quiet people, sensitive people, creative people, people who were once discredited, like me. If before I begged for space, now I offer it, because those who know the pain of exclusion know the value of inclusion. I started my own project, a small artisanal business that has grown much more than I imagined. I receive messages from people who identify with my journey. Some say, "You gave me the courage to start." Others, "You reminded me that I'm capable." And I respond to each one with affection, because this exchange heals. It heals more than any late-breaking excuse from family. My mom now helps me with my commissions. Sometimes she calls me just to chat, something she never did before. We're not perfect, but we're rebuilding, brick by brick. My dad is still more reserved, but he started calling me my artist daughter in front of others. These are small gestures, but for someone who's never had one, these gestures are huge. I no longer hold grudges. I cherish memories. I cherish lessons. The pain I experienced shaped me, but it doesn't define me. I am much more than the girl who brought nothing to the table. I am the woman who learned to set her own, who invites, who listens, who welcomes, and who will never again allow herself to be silenced. So, if you're listening to this and have felt invisible at some point in your life, know this: you have value. And maybe you're just sitting at the wrong table. Get up, build your own. And when you do, look back and smile, because you will have done the impossible, transforming pain into power, If this story touched your heart, do one thing for me now. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe to the channel for more stories that show that everyone has value. And comment below where you're listening from. I read every comment with an open heart. Your voice matters. Your story matters. And you deserve a table where you're heard. Believe in yourself, because when you change, everything around you changes too.